demolition. And once again, these characteristics, not one of them can be created by the results of fire, let alone all 10 of them. We're putting together a hypothesis for controlled demolition. Let's take a look at fire, though. Has your fireplace ever melted, anybody? I have had some really, really hot fires, and it never has melted. So the official story even suggests that there's no melting of steel. You've heard that. And that the steel, in fact, was simply softened by the fire. And steel does have a tendency to get soft and can sag at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's be fair about that. That's one of the reasons high-rise buildings are fireproof, even though none of them have come down. Office fires are 930 to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. So NIST has to come up with a hot fire. They claim traffic analysis, which was taken from steel samples selected due to their proximity of the hottest fires at the jet plane impacts, only show 452 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's no evidence to suggest that the fires were even hot enough to soften steel. In fact, in the South Tower, Chief Oriel Palmer gets to the 78th floor. He says there's 2 small pockets of fire and they put it out with 2 lines. That was 10 minutes before the building was demolished. Above him, Brian Clark is coming down bringing a group of survivors. He says there were small flames visible through the damaged wall, lapping up against the wall. Where was the huge roaring inferno that devoured this building? Let's take a look at this data from the FEMA report. We're assembling a hypothesis for the controlled demolition. We want to use all of the information. So, FEMA says, in their Appendix C, evidence of a severe high-temperature corrosion attack on the steel, including oxidation and sulfidation, with subsequent intergranular melting. FEMA actually documents the melting of the beams. In fact, they show it. They show the effects of sulfur formed during the hot corrosion attack on the steel. And the New York Times calls it the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation. This does not happen in office fires. Capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, a 1-inch column being reduced to 1/2-inch thickness. Its edges, which are curled like a paper scroll, from a 1/2-inch thick, wide-flanged column being thinned to razor sharpness. Gaping holes, some larger than a silver dollar, like you see in this former wide-flanged column. Steel fires do not do this to steel. This is Appendix C, very well documented. FEMA did a great job on this particular part of their report. They document intergranular melting, the hot sulfur attack, which lowers the melting point of steel, allowing this melting to occur. This is the former wide-flanged beam that somehow thinned to razor sharpness and then scrolled in on itself. Extremely unusual. They do their own X-ray dispersive spectroscopy, their EDS graphs, and they show what really amounts to thermate as well. They show the high iron content, the aluminum, and what was done with all of this evidence. It was destroyed by NIST when they took over the investigation. If the data doesn't support the fire hypothesis, destroy it. This is the kind of science our tax dollars are being paid for, are paying for. I'll take your question at the end. We're almost there, I promise you. So fire engineering calls FEMA's investigation a half-baked farce, not referring to Appendix C. The structural damage from the planes and the explosive ignition of jet fuel in themselves were not enough to bring the building down. This is fire engineers, and the editor, Bill Manning, of Fire Engineering, the 125-year-old magazine used by fire protection engineers to communicate with each other. Let's take a look at this famous NIST report that claimed to solve the whole problem for us and explain how the building collapsed. In fact, how and why 1 and 2 collapsed, and WTC7. That was their goal. Let's take a look, though, at their stated objectives. The focus of the investigation was on the sequence of events from the instant of aircraft impact to the initiation of collapse for each tower. For brevity in this report, this sequence is referred to as the probable collapse sequence. Interesting. It doesn't actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for collapse initiation were reached, and collapse became, they somehow claim, inevitable. In other words, 10,000 pages and 3 years and $20 million of your tax money has gone right up to the point where the first truss begins to sag and pull in the first column, and then it stops. It just stops. There's nothing after that. Well, that's not quite true. I have that half page that speculates what happened after that. It goes like this. The structure below the level of collapse initiation offered minimal resistance to the falling building mass at and above the impact zone. The potential energy released by the downward movement of the large building mass far exceeded the capacity of the intact structure below to absorb that through the energy of deformation. The building section above came down essentially at free fall speed. That is speculation, not the free fall speed, but that the columns below could absorb well, they were destroyed. You've seen that yourself. So, wait a minute. What's the title of this report? Final report on the collapse of the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Should it have been called Final Report on the Initiation of Collapse? Why did they stop at the point where everything begins? After all, you can calculate the resistance of that 80,000 tons of structural steel. It's not a big deal. To the falling 110,000 kilowatt hours of gravitational potential. And it turns out, by the way, if you do calculate it, and that calculation is on our website, it will be absorbed by the deformation of steel in about 2 or 3 stories. So, why do they stop? Because had they gone any further, they would have had to account for all of the data supporting the explosive demolition of the building that you've been dragged through for the last couple of hours. They did not want to have to do that. If the original question gives you the wrong conclusion about your fire hypothesis, draw conclusions about a different question, the initiation of collapse. That's the kind of science that we're talking about, and why Jim Hoffman cites in his Building a Better Mirage, NIST's 3-year, $20 million cover-up of the crime of the century. It's excellent reading, which exposes numerous unfounded assumptions, such as why the South Tower falls first. They actually claim, for instance, that there was more core damage in the South Tower, and that's why it fell after only 56 minutes versus 102 minutes over here, which took the direct blow. That's where your tax dollars are going. It's a mountain of distraction. 10,000 pages. They're hoping they'll never read all this stuff, including this half page on their core presumption that collapse initiation is followed by global collapse. They call it classic progressive collapse, as if it's ever happened before in a steel frame building. How can it be classic? It's full of outrageous lies, fudged computer simulations. They're actually quite open about how they create 2 different scenarios. Scenario A and B, which are fairly realistic according to the known parameters, such as the airplane speed, the strength of the building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't work. You put it in their computer model and the building didn't fall. So they created more harsh scenarios. They increased the airspeed. They decreased the strength of the building, and et cetera, et cetera. The heat of the fire. They're actually open about this. Until the computer model shows the building collapsing. But they don't produce any of the data. You can't download it. It's not available, causing structural engineers to cry about this, because this is a public investigation with public dollars. It's supposed to be open in the spirit of the scientific method. And yet, their own chief of NIST's Fire Science Division calls for an independent review. Let's look at real alternatives that might have been the cause of the collapse of the Twin Towers. That's a damning indictment from your own fire chief. So, if the report doesn't support the hypothesis, falsify it. That's the kind of science our tax dollars are going to. There's a destruction of evidence at 800 truckloads a day being recycled to China, and the Fire Engineering magazine says crucial evidence that can answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, as showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop completely. If the evidence contradicts the fire hypothesis, destroy it. Do we have testimony? Yes, the 118 firefighters we heard so much about. Do we have whistleblowers? Yes, here's one, Kevin Ryan, who worked for UL Laboratories. He lost his job. Why? Because NIST hires Underwriter Laboratories to build these mock samples of the trusses supporting the wall panels. The span was 35 feet, and there was four different samples, and they had different varying degrees of fireproofing, including some having none. They have 2,000 degrees underneath, according to ASTM E119, and twice the amount of loading known to be on the office. And guess what? It sagged a few inches, but it did not fail. What does NIST do with this experimental data? They throw it out, and they claim that it sagged 42 inches, and that's what they put in their magic computer model. If your experiments don't support the fire hypothesis, ignore them and create your own data. This is where our tax dollars are going. Do we have expert corroboration that talks about the controlled demolition of the Twin Towers? Too methodical to be a chance result of airplanes colliding with the structures, Vandermeer says, explosives expert. In my opinion, after the airplanes hit the Trade Center, there were some explosive devices inside the buildings that caused the towers to collapse. Looked like a classic controlled demolition, says Mike Taylor. The collapse of the World Trade Center towers mirrored the strategy used by demolition experts. William Rice, structural engineer. The prevailing theory would have us believe that each of the Twin Towers inexplicably collapsed upon itself, crushing all 287 massive columns on each floor while maintaining a free fall speed, as if the 100,000 or more tons of supporting structural steel framework underneath did not exist.
You've seen many of the managed demolitions where they implode a building and they cause it essentially to fall vertically because they cause all of the vertical columns to fail simultaneously. That's exactly what it looked like, and that's what happened.
It was live on television. I mean, just literally millions of people.
It appears to me a charge has been placed in the building. Now, this is Ronald Hamburger, who joined the FEMA team after making this statement. Well, did they look at the hypothesis of controlled demolition? No. If your own experts contradict the fire hypothesis, ignore them. Do we have foreknowledge of the destruction? Let's listen to Mayor Rudolph Giuliani.
I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which is right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management, and we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building, so we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found the exit, got out, walked north, took a lot of people with it.
10 minutes of forewarning? Did he tell the fire department to get out of the building? The building's going to come down. How did he know the building was going to come down? No high-rise steel frame structures ever fallen. There were 300 firemen in these buildings. Did he need a few heroes to remain behind? If your own behavior undermines your credibility, lie about it. Giuliani claims he never made those statements that you just heard him make. I swear to God. We have plenty of video evidence, and therefore we're suggesting that the hypothesis of controlled demolition is fully supported by the direct evidence, the circumstantial evidence, And, well, let me just ask you guys, is there anybody who thinks these buildings came down by fire? I know we had some before. Raise your hand really high. Say something. So anybody unsure still? Sure. So?
I hear crickets.
You hear crickets?
Yeah.
The gentleman who was unsure about Building 7, are you sure about this one? Or were you? Well, I'll ask you to come, and I know you can come up with some great questions for us. Well, that's it. And how many believe that you're brought down by controlled demolition? All the rest, that's 100%. I rarely get 100%. So usually there's one or two, and I honor those folks because they're telling the truth under fairly difficult circumstances, and we learn more from them than ourselves. Well, here's our problem. All of you and me in this room have a big problem because our worldview is not, most of us, some of us are enlightened, most of us are on our way. We're not geared to accept this reality. We think the world is safe. We think, let's just say for a moment, Al-Qaeda didn't have access to these buildings either, right? And that's a safe assumption. Assuming that somebody else did. And we're talking about some sort of inside job with some elements from within our government most likely involved. That's not supposed to happen in America. Okay? So our worldview is really messed up. So I understand that you're in a state, some of you, of shock at this point, not just because I've talked for way too long, but because we have a real problem on our hands. It's easier to go into paralysis and not take any action whatsoever with these kinds of thoughts. Our government wouldn't do this to us. How many of you thought this? I would have heard about, well, let's talk about this for a second. Our government, every major war has been started by a false flag operation in America. The sinking of the Lusitanians was documented as being a setup by the United States government. The Maine, remember the Maine, that was a false flag operation. The Northwoods Project, Google that. You'll find that limits are brought to John F. Kennedy. The plan to have an airline hijacked and blame it on Cuba so that we could invade them. John F. Kennedy denied that request and fired a few people over it, and he was assassinated shortly after that. The Gulf of Tonkin event is proven to have been a lie. The USS Liberty was bombed not by Egyptian airplanes, but by Israeli airplanes. And this was to be blamed on the Egyptians. In fact, Lyndon Baines Johnson is on video saying, "I want that damn ship sunk." And that is available on the internet for you. Well, anyway, let's go to the next one. I would have heard about it by now. It couldn't have been kept a secret. This is a big one. Well, you are hearing about it now, okay? It's irrelevant how long it took you to get this information. It took me a long time. 18 months ago, I was driving down the road, and I heard David Ray Griffin on the radio and talking about beams being hurled 500 feet laterally at 50 miles an hour. Let's turn the lights down a little bit still. And their ends dripping with molten metal. I'm shocked. This sounds like this is a reasonable man. You heard him today. I had to pull over. I was on my way to a meeting. I didn't care. I needed to hear this information. So I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican. I swear to God. I voted for him twice. I love my country.
How can you say that? How can you say that?
This has been very difficult for me to turn around. I'm not an expert in controlled demolition. I'll let somebody else. Well, wait a minute. You're the jury. You've got a prosecution. You've got a defense presenting evidence to you. It is your responsibility as a citizen of the United States of America to examine the evidence and make a decision and not sit on it. You have to come to an internal conclusion about this information. Don't let yourself go back into paralysis. It will eat at you. It's too horrible. I don't want to think about it. I didn't even see or hear this stuff tonight. The worst form of denial. It will happen to all of us. So we avoid the debate, go back to sleep, become part of the problem. Don't let this happen to you. You've got to get motivated. You've got to take action. And based on the rational reaction to what I presented to you, which is scientific, forensic-based evidence, which cannot and has not been refuted by the official stories or popular mechanics, for that matter, or Michael Sherman, or anybody else. They cannot deal square on with this evidence. So work through your fears, your disbeliefs, and your mindsets. I'm still doing it, I swear. Get informed and inform other people, everybody, particularly architects and engineers, because they have some of the necessary credibility that will turn the heads and open the eyes of people in Congress. We need 1,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation on our website by 9/11. 2008. We have 280 right now. We've got a long way to go to get this new investigation. But and I need your help, and I'm going to tell you exactly how you can help me. First, I want to point out that we're not just talking about buildings anymore. Are you all with me on that? This is a huge problem and a huge set of symptoms. Let's just take a look. We have airline flights which never transmitted hijacking codes for the first time in a hijacking. They have plenty of time to transmit these hijacking codes, the pilots. We have NORAD that stood down for an hour and a half while these 4 planes were flying around the skies, unmolested. And by the way, NORAD had intercepted in the year before 60 airplanes. It takes less than 10 minutes. Hijackers, some of them are still alive, interviewed by the BBC and the London Guardian. One guy walked into the U.S. Embassy. Hey, that's my picture. That's my birthday. But I'm not a hijacker. FBI has dozens of whistleblowers who are threatened with losing their jobs if they speak up, and they have anyway. Look at Google Savell Edmonds. The stock market put options are enormous. Millions have been made. And the investigation goes right up to the previous owner of the Deutsche Bank, the previous CIA official, actually, and it stops. And we're told by the 9/11 Commission that, well, Al-Qaeda wasn't involved, apparently, in the put options, so there's nothing else to look at. Well, who was involved? That's who. We have the 9/11 commissioners with massive conflicts of interest in the defense industry, the oil industry, the insurance industry, banking industry, and the media. All of them profited enormously from 9/11. We need to look at who benefited. Cui bono. Terrorist funding from Pakistan, $100,000 payment from the second in command of the ISI to Mohammed Atta in America. This is very well documented. Afghanistan was a huge source of profit. For $180 billion a year was coming out of Afghanistan, 90% of the world's heroin production. The Taliban comes in, before they come in, it's 2,800 metric tons. They choke it off to 187 metric tons. A year later, after 9/11, we kicked them out, right? By official standards, the amount of heroin coming out of Afghanistan skyrockets to 3,500. Guess what it is today? 6,700 metric tons. Official records. There's no war on heroin in Afghanistan. And most of us know about the oil and gas pipelines that the Taliban was giving the contract to the company in Brazil prior to 9/11. Now those are under construction, headed by the head of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, who was a previous UNICAL executive. Well, there's a lot to be said. Why didn't we know the truth? Well, maybe let's take a look at this quote. The CIA owns everyone of any significance in the major media. That's a heck of a statement from one of our former CIA officials. Well, he died shortly after making that statement. It was very suspicious. It's a boating accident, actually. Well, you Google Operation Mockingbird, putting CIA reporters on the CIA payroll. This is headed up by Frank Windsor, Alan Jones, Richard Jones. It's real. Many of our top and medium level reporters and executives are on the CIA payroll. And this is documented by Project Censor, an outfit which is dedicated to bringing forth the 25 most censored stories in America. And they are awesome. Well, now you can begin to see why we did not see the truth about 9/11. It appears as if our government lied to us about the building collapses. The 9/11 Commission report reinforced that lie. FEMA and NIST justified it. And the corporate media repeated and hammered it in. We really didn't stand much of a chance. Now, I believe I've proven to you, in fact, all of you by hand count, at least, that explosives were used to destroy these buildings. And it takes months of planning to plant these explosives, dozens of men months. Do you think that Al-Qaeda had access to the building? Probably not. And we don't speculate as to who did or who may have been responsible at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 truth. So, unfortunately, this is just the beginning of a very disturbing but essential journey for you back into the nightmare of 9/11. The evidence you've seen tonight is just a fraction of that which has been assembled by the 9/11 truth movement, which is growing by millions every year due to the compelling nature of it. The questions raised are numerous and ominous that must be answered in a new investigation. So I encourage you to discover the evidence that I have not had time to give you. There are some incredible DVDs, including 9/11 Mysteries, which you've seen clips of, and Loose Change also. With freedom comes responsibility. This is the most important event since Pearl Harbor, the devastating attacks on our own citizens. The horrible events deserve a thorough, unimpeachable investigation with subpoena power, and that's what we are demanding at 89 on the Truth. So I'm asking every one of you to go online and sign a petition. It takes 2 minutes and it's free. You have to follow up and help me. Help us at 89 on the Truth. You have to get this DVD, which is only 15 bucks, a half a dozen of them, and keep them in circulation. It's extremely important. You can't talk to people about this. They have to see it. You wouldn't have believed it if you didn't see it. Help us get to 1,000 architects and engineers. We also have this excellent DVD by Jim Hoffman and Don Paul. Don Paul begins to point at who's responsible. He'll give you more information about that. 9/11 Mysteries is available online. You can watch it. Google it. David Ray Griffin's books are excellent. You can get them online. You can look at the Loose Change Final Cut, which just came out 3 weeks ago, and check out Dr. Stephen Jones' excellent website, Scholars for Truth and Justice for 9/11.org. And sign our petition and consider becoming a sustaining member. We are hamstrung financially. We have to work full time. So we need to pay some of our volunteers so that they can do this work. We can't get it out without your help. For as little as $10 a month, you can support us. We need to bust through in the mainstream this year. We don't know how much time we have until the next 9/11, or how devastating it will be, or what sort of police state measures it will invoke. Go to the website and get all the information. Get informed if you're not quite comfortable. There are evidence cards, which you all have, and you can take that evidence card. Can you hand me one of those? Oh, and there's this one, which you've seen in the slides, but there's also the other evidence card, which you can pick up one of them for free. It lists all the evidence. We've stuck our necks out there so you don't have to be called a conspiracy theorist. Let them call us that. Just give people the card. They're 9 cents a piece. You can buy 100 of them, hand them to everybody you know, walk them into architecture and engineering firms, and say, hey, there's this group of almost 300 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. What do you think about it? You don't have to be see the conspiracy theorists. We stick our necks out for you. You have to speak out. It's your responsibility. And because the time comes when your silence is betrayal. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much. Well, for those of you who are worn out, you're welcome to leave, but the question and answer session tends to be the most exciting because it gets into the stuff that you really want to hear about. There's a microphone up here. I'm sure that our voice technician, sound technician has it working. And who has the first question? I hope the gentleman who is unsure about World Trade Center 7. Go ahead.
First of all, Mr. Gage, let me thank you for coming here and being part of the A&E. It's men like you who are brave enough to put their reputations on the line.
Hold on. We're going to replace this microphone. Please bring another microphone up to replace this one. There must be one here. It's a bad one. In the meantime, I'll let you speak in my microphone. Go ahead. Go.
He's asking me to wait.
Don't wait. This is just going to come.
Okay, let me just first express my thanks to you, Mr. Gage, for being part of this movement and doing what you do, because as a 9/11 blogger for the last 5 years, I've seen an increase in the sophistication of the self-proclaimed debunkers. And one of the things I've noticed is that I don't have the engineering expertise to argue with some of these people when they give me these mathematical calculations about how pressure and force can cause certain things. And it's people like you that are able to stand up and answer these criticisms, and I thank you for it.
Thank you.
And I guess my question is, what I would love to see, and my fantasy is on the corporate media at 8 o'clock at night to see the real debate between people like you and these self-proclaimed debunkers. I mean, no offense to the loose change boys, but if on Democracy Now! I had a group of people like you speaking to these people instead of a couple of kids or young men, I think it would have been much more effective. And I'm wondering what the architects and engineers are doing to try to bring this debate out to the forefront and answer some of these criticisms directly.
Well, we need your help in this effort. Call every radio talk show host you know and say, just pepper them. When are you going to start dealing with reality relative to the World Trade Center? There's 300 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. What are you doing about that? Get the debate going. Now, we do have a debate coming up in April with one of the debunkers, Mark Roberts, actually. And we put ourselves up to Democracy Now! But we haven't heard back from her. We will be applying to mainstream media. We did have so that was very exciting. This happened last year. First foray into real mainstream media. Next question.
Okay, yeah, so thank you for hearing and putting forth so much as you did, and you're facing this problem straight on. Could I ask you questions? The elevator shaft, you mentioned something that was necessary to plant explosives without being known. What was it?
Well, access to the elevator shaft. Access is through access through security. You get in the elevator shaft during the modernization, perhaps, and you have access to the core walls. So you plant the explosive that way without being seen by any of the occupants.
Did that actually happen?
I don't know. I'd like to know. A thorough, unimpeachable investigation with subpoena power could find out. That's what we're demanding.
Okay, and then secondly, for the media publicity, would it be coercion and extortion or buying them off or what? Why do they comply with this?
I would encourage you to do some research on this with Project Censor, who watches the media really, really carefully and explores and exposes media complicity in some of these events and censorship of key stories that we don't hear about as Americans. They're very effective in putting out the myth and the series of myths about a lot of different things we don't hear about.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gage, for your time. If anyone's interested in the 9/11 group, our site is pdx911truth.org. That's pdx911truth.org.
What does PDX stand for?
PDX is the Port Main South Poland. It's like an airport. That's pdx911truth.org.
And you guys are very active. Are you on the street on the 11th of every month?
I go to the airport once a week, hand out DVDs. We hand out DVDs at the airport on Fridays from about 10 to 2 o'clock. I've burned hundreds of DVDs per month the past couple years. And just I've talked to Mayor Portman about not doing the top off fest here in town back in October. I've been involved in the 9/11 here since 2003.
How many of you guys are out there at the airport on the streets? Let me just say that the 11th of every month is an international movement to get people on the streets and gain awareness around here. It's enough for us to talk about it in a fairly limited setting like this, but unless we go out and do something and get attention to those who are completely unaware of these issues, and a great way to do it is a presence on the street. Google truthaction.org for more information about effective ways, but also pdx911.org.
pdx911truth.org. Also, there's next Saturday, there's the Peace Rally downtown and a Southwest Park blocks from 11 to 6 o'clock next Saturday.
And is there a local chapter We Are Change in Portland?
No, there is. Okay.
I want you to talk to us about that when you come up. Next question.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your time again, Mr. Gage. And two other things that happened on 9/11 is the Pentagon and the Pennsylvania crash. I want to know your hypothesis on those two things. And secondly, 4 planes crashed that day, and I'd like to know if you got the 4 cleanest plane crash sites you've ever seen.
I haven't examined the plane crash sites. There's a lot of problems with every one of these 4 flights. We focus at 89 on Truth on the Twin Towers and Building 7 because they contain the most compelling, direct, forensic, science-based evidence that is indisputable. There are lots of controversies within the 9/11 Truth movement on the other 2 flights, and we're architects. We focus on the buildings and engineers. So there are serious problems at the Pentagon. Most people believe that there's a hole there that a plane can't fit through, and it's pretty compelling evidence. So you should look at it very carefully and come to your own conclusions. We're going to focus on the Twin Towers. Relative to Shanksville, there's some serious problems with an airplane that, first of all, whose debris is strewn over an 8-mile area, who other people saw a jet fighter nearby, and whose official crash site contains no airplane parts. It's a real problem. Thank you.
My question is basically, how did you come up with 1,000 architects and engineers? What does that number signify to policymakers? I also have 2 other questions. One is, how did you go about your turnaround? And the third one would simply have to do with the body of evidence you presented. If I'm to look at it, and I'm not disputing your claim, but if I'm to look at the evidence, I would appreciate seeing about a quarter of the time of buildings that experienced fire, similar construction to the kind of fire that we would have seen, so that I can see what happens to those buildings and understand what the difference is between those and what happens to demolition, which was repeated consistently and made an impression in my mind. I would like that similar impression to be made in my mind of the fact that you state no steel structures burn down. They do not fail. I'd like to see what does happen to them. Do they char? Do they slightly bend over? What happens? So that I can know.
Yes, in 100 examples we have of high-rise office fires, not one has collapsed. What does happen is you get sagging, as you saw in the World Trade Center sample testing that was done by the UL laboratory. There are beams that will sag a little bit after burning for 18 hours. In some cases, I think 6 or 12 hours. So that's what happens. And sometimes some of those girders have to be replaced. Well, the ones that sag have to be replaced. But no collapse has ever happened. So that's all I have to say about your most prolific question. Unless you can prompt me further. As far as my turnaround, visuals. It's a matter of visuals.
It's a matter of seeing something repeatedly. Like initially you showed images in a particular way. You show the collapse of the building that is being detonated. And that is shown repeatedly so that it makes an impression. So that I always remember that. When I leave, I think of that. That's the thing I think of the most. Because that's the thing you repeat the most. And that's a very conscious effort in filmmaking. So if I was to look at it as an objective viewer and not be propaganized, and I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, but what I am saying is if you consider me to be an educated audience, then I need to see what happens to building steel structures as they burn.
Well, we have no evidence of collapse in steel structures. I could show you some high-rise steel frame structures. I could show you some examples of steel buildings that sag, non-high-rise buildings that have collapsed because they don't have fireproofing, and they have relatively thin members, trusses, that are more than 25 feet off the ground, so they don't have to have fireproofing. Okay.
That would make me feel like an intelligent audience.
Because I only gave you one side of the picture. Okay.
You gave me an impression that you're giving me an impression.
Thank you. I really understand what you're saying. I'll endeavor to find some of those photos and get them into the PowerPoint. Now, as far as the turnaround, I have never been a conspiracy theorist. I think I did probably believe that John F. Kennedy was assassinated because I just had that feeling. I never did a lot of research on it. So, having voted for Arnold Schwarzenegger for governor, I started looking at this and had some immediate real problems. And the problem with 9/11 is it's tied to all of these other problems that are endemic and that you become aware of, and then you start doing research about, and you realize they're rabbit holes that go deeper and start connecting with each other, and things are not as they seem in our country. For instance, I was shocked to learn that there's 350 or so camps that have been constructed on American soil, spread out through America, all across America, allegedly constructed for the detaining of illegal aliens under real problematic circumstances such as war. But these are in the whitest areas, if you will, of America, all across. Halliburton, who owns Kellogg, Brown & Root, received $385 million to design and construct these, and they're built, some of them. They're still under construction. This is not denied. Why? What are they preparing for? We're promised another 9/11. What is happening to our country? This is just one example of some real problems that you're going to find out about as you research 9/11. Next question.
Hi, I'm Mike from We Are Change Portland, and I just kind of set up a YouTube website for We Are Change because a couple weeks ago I went to a Ron Wyden event. He does these county-by-county town hall meetings. He's our senator. He's one of our 2 senators. And asked him directly regarding his position on 9/11 truth and whether he'd be willing to make it a priority, and he just flat out denied any interest pretty much in 9/11 truth and kind of just stated the party line that he didn't have any problem with the official explanation. And so if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they can do it through the YouTube / We Are Change Portland. I'll be setting up a regular site pretty soon. But I did have a question kind of stemming from that, and I know that Cynthia McKinney and Ron Paul, and then Dennis Kucinich are the only 3 Congresspeople I know that have actually spoke openly about having serious issues with the official explanation. And I'm not aware of any senators that do, and I was wondering if you know of any additional Congress members that have expressed any doubt about the official explanation, and whether you're actively pursuing them, or kind of if you have any intent to try to meet with them directly, if you're trying to schedule meetings with them or anything like that.
We need to put together a political action committee at ae911truth.org. I have so little time. I get about 4 or 5 hours of sleep average a night because I have to come home from work and I have to answer over 100 emails typically. That takes about 2 or 3 hours. And then I have to coordinate events like this. I'm traveling all around the country every other weekend in a different city. And there's no time to do the proper job. We have volunteers, but they have jobs too. So we need to build an economic base in which all of you can assist us in getting the word out. There's materials to be purchased. There's time, which costs money, which we need to be freed up to do this job properly. So it is extremely important. Having said that, I've gone into my congressman's office. Congressperson Ellen Tauscher gave this presentation. I had a whole hour, and they were blown away. These are the 2 aides, her top aides. And you got to come back in here and tell us information, Ellen Tauscher. So I'm waiting, and I get this letter. It's a form letter. Thank you very much. We believe the 9/11 Commission just really did a great job, and we've got to secure our borders and all of this stuff. Well, it's not our borders we need to secure. It's our government, it appears. We Are Change is an organization that is nationwide and is in many cities. And I encourage you to help this gentleman by joining the organization. And they do get out on the streets on the 11th of every month also. This is extremely important work.
Dr. Gage, thank you very much.
By the way, I'm not a doctor.
Okay.
I never went to medical school and I don't have a PhD. So that was a mistake in the introduction.
Oh, Mr. Gage. I want to thank you for coming here, and I'm James Randall. I'm myself a degree and licensed electrical engineer, and I signed your petition, and I encourage everyone else to do the same. I'm wondering if you've taken this on like the university circuit and getting a lot of, there's a lot of students there that are studying engineering and physics and science and various things, and you could probably pack a house, quite large. With a minimal amount of advertising, with a kind of a captive audience stuck on a campus.
Indeed. In fact, we've been on a dozen campuses, and we've had very good results. We'll go anywhere. We don't do cold calling. We're booked up all the way through summer just on people like you in Portland calling us and saying, will you come and speak to us? So it's really great. We're able to get everywhere. Everywhere we can. I can't travel every weekend. I mean, I go nuts. I have to work, and I've got a life, and I used to have a wife, and 9/11 ended that situation. But I get joint custody of the dogs, and that helps me a whole lot. We need love in our life, and we need time to create and maintain love. And I didn't give that to my wife, and that's why I'm out on the road now a whole lot more.
And one follow-up question. I know you said you were a Ronald Reagan Republican. Are you now a Ron Paul Republican?
Yeah, my intention, if Ron Paul is still running in November, and if we have elections, and that's a real question, because if there is another 9/11, the executive powers executive decree signed by George Bush, without any legislative oversight, decrees that he can shut down Congress in the event of an emergency and suspend elections. And if there is another 9/11, or one worse, whether it's a suitcase nuke, as Chertoff has a gut reaction is going to happen, or a biological event I can assure you, they're going to button down most of the remaining freedoms that we have and suspend elections. And that's why we're working so hard, all of us, to keep that from happening by awareness, breaking the myth.
Well, I'm going to write him in regardless, but thank you very much for your time, sir.
I intend to vote for Ron Paul. Oh, you'll write him in even if he's not running.
That's right.
Next question. Next question.
Good evening, sir. My name is Jim Dunsing. I'm a candidate for United States Congress. Hopefully it's not the last election that we have. I'm from Las Vegas. I'm the chair of the Nevada Libertarian Party. Up until about a month ago, I was the chair of the Libertarian State Chairs Organization. At our annual meeting, I invited Dylan Avery to come and address our body with his questions. As a result of that, I'm no longer the chair of that organization. However, there is a growing movement within the Libertarian Party to bring not truth, but justice to the 9/11 movement. Because only politics can bring justice. We can talk about truth, we can argue about pods or the Pentagon until we're blue in the face. But until we have a congressional hearing with full subpoena power like we're discussing, we're not going to get justice for the firemen, for the victims, for the families, and they deserve it.
Absolutely.
I don't want to put you on the spot, although I'm going to. On Memorial Day weekend, we have our national convention, and I've already established a debate about 9/11 justice. And if you're willing to attend, I'd love for you to debate anyone who's willing to debate you on this issue.
I'll be happy to debate anyone on this issue and anywhere I can get to. You're welcome.
I was wondering, have you looked into the Virginia Woods Hutchinson effect or Dr. Deagle's view on getting down the towers? Or is that?
There's quite a few alternative theories. This is one alternative theory to the official theory. There are also alternative theories to the alternative theories. And they range from no planes hitting the Pentagon. There's actually quite a number of people who believe this, that the videos have been faked and the planes put in the fireball and everything. So you have to look at some of these theories, yourself and come to your own conclusions. I haven't even had time to delve into them to the point where I can respond to them credibly. The others are that there was nuclear blasts in the Twin Towers. For instance, this degree of pulverization of the concrete to a fine talcum powder, there's some questions about how that could have happened. There's no grinder small enough and powerful enough to accomplish that. And we're not only talking about the concrete, but about the steel decking and the floor trusses under it. In all of the dust, you can put a magnet to it and you see small shiny filings. Could that be the 20 gauge decking, which is galvanized steel? Because you don't see the decking anywhere on the site, 220 acres of it. So what caused the complete destruction down to very, very fine granules of this stuff? We don't know that thermate can be responsible for that alone. Even super high-tech thermate may or may not be explosive enough to do that degree of destruction. We don't know. So it spawns these other theories, such as nuclear weapons. But Dr. Jones has looked at this very carefully and has come up with the fact that while there are some high tritium levels at the ground zero site, they are not characteristic of the signature you'd expect in a traditional small nuclear weapon. So there are those who suggest that there are more modern forms of fourth generation nuclear weapons. And I haven't looked into that, and there's no body of experimentation we can do to determine if that's true or not. So it remains an open question. Additionally, there's some people who suggest that directed energy weapons, some perhaps from space, brought these buildings down. And there's not enough information to suggest that. We have a theory that's fully supported by the evidence, so we don't go fishing for all of these alternative theories that architects and engineers for 9/11 truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Several short questions for you, but actually a follow-up to what you were just talking about. Do you have anything new to tell us, perhaps, about maybe some fuel air weapon that was involved?
Oh, well, Jim Hoffman has speculated that perhaps a thermobaric bomb has gone off at these different floor levels, which would be, for instance, hydrogen and oxygen combined, released on the floors, and ignited. Its only residue would be water. And it would be a very powerful explosive without a flash. So that's a possibility. But can that explain the degree of pulverization of this decking? I just don't intuit that that's the case, but I'm not an explosives expert, and I haven't seen any additional information that would validate that for me.
A few quick questions. Has anybody ever done a really high-class, two-dimensional spatial Fourier analysis of the scene, of the buildings?
What the hell is that?
Maybe talk about that later. How about a, well, similar question, Fourier analysis of audio that's available to try to pick out maybe characteristic signatures of an explosion, for example?
Oh, yeah, there is some work being done in that area, and it's pretty interesting. I get so many really interesting emails, and we have a team of 12 volunteers. We meet every week on the phone for 2 hours, and we talk about these kinds of things, but they're coming in faster than we can deal with them. So if you Google audio analysis explosions 9/11, you'll come up with some of those, and if you come up with something that's just really cool, email it to me with an exclamation mark. I won't tell that to anybody else. And I might be able to get to it, and I'm sorry. I try to get to all the emails, but we can't.
Any chance the Chinese might help us?
Well, all of this steel has been sent on a slow boat to China. You would think that they might have said something by now because they have all the evidence.
Yeah, wouldn't that help them in the propaganda war?
Well, the question again is China our enemy or is China our friend? And who's us? There is more going on between enemies. I mean, the USSR and I'm a Reagan Republican. The enemy was the USSR. There was more collusion between our government and the Soviet government than we ever want to know about.
I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about House Bill 1955 and Senate Bill 1959, and just its most recent, it's still going on, what the development is. And also, I spoke with young men who had done loose change, and they actually said that their lives had been threatened, whether or not yours has been.
Oh, no, I haven't had any threats, and this is the first time I heard that they have. So I'm really disappointed and alarmed about that. I hope that doesn't happen to me. I have no choice, though, but to stand in the face of such a thing were it to happen. I would rather die telling the truth than live in a police state. That's how America was born, with people who were committed to truth and justice and freedom and America. So that's what we all need to be about. Your other question was really important. What did I do?
If you could comment.
Oh, HR 1959. Yeah, there are a couple of bills. One has sailed through Congress. 409-6 was the vote. Here's what they voted on without reading what was in the bill. It's the Homegrown Terrorism Act. It says that if you use force, you can be arrested as a terrorist without any rights, basically. They call you a terrorist, you don't have right of habeas corpus, etc. If I'm wrong about any of that, I hope somebody will correct me. And guess how they define force? They don't. And that's the problem. And it's a real problem. H.R. 1959 is sailing through the Senate, and it's likely to pass also, unless all of us stand up and object vehemently. Guess what? The Simon Wiesenthal Center came to Congress and presented a 5-minute video on homegrown terrorism to the congressman under the auspices of a subcommittee of the Homeland Security. In that 5-minute presentation is a whole series of Taliban and militant websites. They're using that to spur the acceleration of the passing of this bill. Guess whose website was stacked in between the Taliban and the militant websites? Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Right? I couldn't believe it. They're branding us as terrorists. What does this mean?